You might notice that in addition to making your meaning not very clear, euphemisms can make your writing wordy. You want to eliminate any phrases that make your writing inconcise or wordy. No one could provide you with a list of all the different kinds of phrases that might create inconcise writing, but I'm going to go over passive voice, nominals, expletive constructions, modifiers that can be shortened, sentences that can be combined, empty phrases, and redundancies. These are all the kinds of wordy structures that tend to appear in early drafts of essays, and you want to look for these and eliminate them in your own essays and summaries. Your textbook advises you to use vigorous verbs instead of dull verbs. To have, to make, and to be are some of the dull verbs you can look for and possibly, although not always, eliminate. Passive voice constructions, which you learned about from Sentence Lecture 1, can usually be revised for conciseness. Notice too that passive voice constructions use those dull verbs. Don't forget, passive voice and past tense are not the same. Passive voice relegates the logical subject of the sentence to the direct object position. If necessary, review the passive voice sentence lecture so you can eliminate unnecessary passive constructions in your writing. Nominals and expletives also use the dull verbs. Nominals are verbs that have been converted to nouns. When possible, eliminate nominals and use strong specific verbs instead. To eliminate expletives, look for sentences beginning with their or it. Usually, sentences that begin with these pronouns are using the expletive construction. And why it's called an expletive construction, I'm not sure. It has nothing to do with using four-letter words, although of course these two are inappropriate for college writing. You can have an expletive construction in the middle of a sentence too, as in the following example. While it may seem unnecessary, there are many good reasons to enroll early. You can write that, while it may seem unnecessary, enrolling early is a good idea for several reasons. That eliminates the expletive construction. Having just studied different kinds of phrases and clauses, you know that sentences can often be combined for clarity and conciseness. For example, reading introduces new words. One also encounters different styles of writing when reading. You may write these two sentences, and they're perfectly correct, but it's more concise to combine the sentence, as in the example. Modifiers sometimes can be reduced from phrases or clauses to single words. The students who were tired left early is a wordier way of saying the tired students left early. Look for clauses and phrases that can be reduced and sentences that can be combined in your essays and summaries. Some phrases can be eliminated altogether. These deadwood or empty phrases add no real content to your essays, although sometimes students think they make the writing sound more sophisticated. For example, in the following sentence, as a matter of fact, a phrase adds nothing to the sentence. Phrases like nature of or field of are also meaningless phrases that can usually be eliminated without altering the meaning of the sentence. Don't confuse deadwood with good transitional words, though. If a word or phrase helps the reader make the transition from one sentence to another, it's not an empty phrase. It may add no content, but it serves a good purpose in your writing. Redundancies are phrases that repeat information unnecessarily. For example, 12 o'clock noon is a redundancy because noon is 12 o'clock. Sometimes redundancies occur because the writer doesn't really understand what a word means. For example, as he ascended upward on the escalator, he waved. Ascended means to move upward, so ascend upwards is a redundancy. As the previous example illustrates, many wordy structures can be eliminated if the writer has a good vocabulary. One word can substitute for phrases, clauses, or even sentences. For example, the word nostalgia means a bittersweet longing for the past. If you didn't know this word, you might use the lengthy phrase, bittersweet longing for the past, when you could simply use a single word. Moreover, a good vocabulary will help you develop an appropriate tone and make your meaning clearer to readers. The best way to increase your vocabulary is to read, but you should also know how to use a dictionary. See page 512 in your Little Brown Handbook to see what kinds of information a good dictionary offers. The dictionary provides the denotative meaning of a word, but the connotative meaning is the suggested or implied meaning of the word. Hearing or reading a word often will help you understand the connotation. You already know the connotations of many, many, many words. For example, you know that although they mean the same thing, dwelling place, house, and home all have different connotations. If you're a real estate agent trying to earn your commission, you want to use the word home because home has stronger positive connotations than house or dwelling place. To describe the home you wanted to sell, you would also want to balance concrete and abstract language and general and specific language. As your text explains, whatever you're writing, you need to determine the appropriate balance between general and specific and abstract and concrete language. To achieve the balance you need, you must first understand the differences between these groups of words. Concrete words describe things you can touch, taste, see, hear, or smell. They're usually nouns. Abstract language refers to concepts, relationships, ideas, or emotions. Adjectives are usually abstract. General language refers to groups or categories, whereas specific language identifies items in those groups or categories. As your book states, specific language varies by degrees. Animals is more specific than living creatures, but mammals is even more specific, and dogs is even more specific. Poodles is still more specific. How specific do you need to be? Usually, more specific is better. Usually, the first or second draft of an essay is not specific enough. Students rarely err on the side of being too specific, but it is possible. If ivory toy poodle with a pink ribbon in her hair is more than your readers need to understand and appreciate your meaning, you should be less specific. Toy poodle may be good enough. When you're attempting to describe something so that readers can imagine what you're describing, abstract language is not very useful. If I were robbed in the parking lot at Woodland Hills Mall, for example, it wouldn't help much if I described my assailant as a mean-looking, big and heavy guy who had a gruff look on his face. I would be using all abstract words, and it's likely they would never catch the person who robbed me. It may create an image in your mind when abstract words are used, but usually the image in your mind is not the same image in the mind of another reader. For that, you need to use concrete, specific language. Don't confuse specific language with wordiness. Being very specific when it fits your meaning is not wordy. One final way that you can choose the best possible words to communicate effectively and interestingly is to use figurative language. Your text defines and provides examples of similes, metaphors, and hyperbole. Personification is a form of figurative language that assigns human qualities to non-human objects. A sentence like, "The trees gaze down at us," is an example of personification because trees don't really gaze. An analogy is a specific kind of comparison that compares something familiar to something not familiar so that readers understand the unfamiliar something. One example you'll find is in the essay, Why Johnny Can't Fail. He tries to compare the floating standard to a game that people used to play. He expects his readers will be familiar with that game. Maybe you're not. I wasn't. But it is an analogy, example of analogy. Use figurative language when you want to enhance style, but make sure that the connotations of the figurative language are appropriate for what you're writing, and make sure your figurative language is not cliched. I want to end this lecture with a quote from Mark Twain. He said, "The difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between lightning and the lightning bug." Remember that you can write perfectly correct essays that use words correctly, but the essays that really shine, the ones that earn the higher grades, will contain brilliant word choices. To practice editing your essays for word choice, you should now complete writing exercise 3.